Yeah. There we go. Here we are. Welcome aboard. I'm guest hosting for Leslie Elliott today. I abducted her and threw her into another realm. And so I'm here and joining the chat so you guys can introduce us, David.
Yep. So I'll do, shall I do the blurb?
Yeah, blurb it.
Blurb
Do
away.
blur.
So Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice, CSJ, aka woke, and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here?
Where do we
You can
go
join
from
one of our
here?
groups for only $5 per month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such. And thanks, Benjamin, for hosting today. I forgot to say.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So what's this thing as opposed to peer? Is this peer support or is this like peer bitch session? Like, why are you guys meeting once a week?
Originally, I think we started off thinking it'd be nice to reach out and explain a bit of Solid Ground because it was all completely new. Let people know who we were, voice some of what we found to be troubling issues or things that we weren't sure about, and I guess in a way, sort of model open exploration of things in a live format. Guys, is that what you'd agree with? Or anything to add?
Yeah.
In terms of what, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Deborah.
No, I wasn't sure, Benjamin, if you were asking what's Solid Ground versus what are we doing with this live stream. So,
Well, this
yeah,
live stream, yeah. So here,
okay,
here,
he answered
like,
it.
This thing, yeah.
Jen?
And so this is the 23rd episode. So you guys have quite a backlog over time. I guess just for my own benefit, my own edification, what have you guys like learned in the process? Like, what are some of the like? I guess one way of asking this is, as you've explored all these different topics, are each of you kind of coming to better understand what you're dealing with, or what you're confronting, or what you're grappling with in the culture or in your individual professions?
I think I'm learning that it's the sort of ideology of wokeism has woven itself even more deeply into pretty much every aspect of the culture. And at the same time, I'm also feeling really encouraged because I'm seeing that there's a lot of people that are, profoundly ethical people that share our concerns about that. And so it's been nice to be forming a community of those people. And it really, it renews my faith in humanity and stops me from just, wanting to wash my hands of the entire human enterprise. And, I do sometimes see hopeful signs. So it's been really helpful to me personally from that perspective.
What about you, Deborah?
Yeah, I'd say both with what we're doing through the live stream and then through our groups, and then just my own research. I don't know. I keep wanting to go deeper and deeper and deeper, like what is motivating all of us, such that I get tired of the blaming like those horrible this or this horrible that, and I really want to get down to like, okay, what is it about human beings such that we are in the situation that we're in, and and so to me, I'm looking at the sort of the more the religious motivations, also the whatever's happening, transhumanist, our relationship to technology, and all these things. So I just feel like continuing to have conversations, especially in our online platform, where people are sharing a lot of different articles, which we can discuss. I just can keep going. I guess what I want to say is I want to get to a place where I'm not in some sort of hateful relationship to any of this. And like, I want to, on the deepest level possible, understand. So there is some possibility of moving forward where we're not just constantly battling. It's not going to be one side's just going to win and smash the other, and the other one's going to come and smash the other. So I don't have the answer to it yet, but I just feel like being engaged in this is helping me with that inquiry.
And David, what do you think about the religious versus the technological versus the cultural influences on what disturbs you about culture, what you're questioning about where we're at?
Yeah, there are there are all those distinct elements, but they all come together, don't they? I mean, I think I was just thinking as Deborah was talking of building off what she was saying a bit with the fact that one of the things I'm noticing myself is that whilst it's really useful to keep going deeper and deeper into understanding why or questioning why things might be the way they are, or trying to understand these disturbances in our culture, I do find sometimes there's a bit of a tension in that the kind of sphere that I'm in professionally feels like it might be getting ever increasingly separate from, say, some you guys that I talk to, the community that I find myself in with solid ground, and I sort of get a sense in which I want to be able to ground myself in a conversation that makes more sense to someone who hasn't been diving deeper and deeper. And I think, just from my own personal point of view, I'd like to find ways of pulling myself back out of things again, because you can think about the religious need of the culture and the things that we're missing in the religion-shaped hole in our society, and then you can also look at some of the ways in which even stuff on my course is sort of flavored with critical theory, and yet I don't think people necessarily on my course have seen it or necessarily even notice it. So I'm always trying to find a kind of way to bridge the gap back down to sort of the other space I operate in as well, if that makes sense.
There's this evolutionary biologist, Colin Wright. He's got this meme, or he made a graphic of a meme that I think's been around for a while, where it shows like a left-right spectrum, and he's on the left, and then the far left goes way over here, and suddenly he's a Nazi, right? So when you're trying to be neutral, and the others, and one group or the elite group or very powerful group is pushing things very strongly in another direction, how do you maintain neutrality without being dragged along by their Overton window?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a conversation with sort of my personal tutor the other day, and he seemed to have it in his mind because of some of the criticisms he's heard me talk about on the course. He sort of says, you seem like someone who's very interested in the individual. So it's like, you criticize a collectivist point of view, you become an individualist. He even sort of, I got this sort of sense that what he was saying to me was, what he was thinking about me was that I was denying that racism exists. And you feel like the amount of work sometimes you have to do just to kind of present yourself as a full individual with a full appreciation of things that are going on, but just some problems with some of the issues around this ideology is quite a hard thing for people to do. And that's, I think, probably why our groups are so important, because we can help do that.
This really, I feel that that's a really important awareness, David, about if you guys are kind of creating your own echo chamber, you're getting way too far out, then you might be losing connectivity with people that you could be in dialogue with. So just being aware of that is a really necessary thing, even if it introduces a lot of psychological stress, because you have to do a lot of translating and dealing with like the cognitive dissonance involved in other ideologies.
I want to jump in on something like that because I was just listening to a really good conversation about polarization yesterday. And one of the things this guy's written some books on democracy, and he was talking about, we have the polarization where our group hates the other group and you just ramp up how much you hate the other group. But he said there's another phenomenon that just can occur in group, especially if you're not having air kind of flow, if you will, like between groups, where there can start to be like ideas get more extreme inside the bubble with each other. And then a hierarchy even forms. And then there's like the taste makers who get to do the purity assessment kind of thing, and who's not scoring well enough in that. And then all this, what do you call it? Manning the frontier of the edges and policing it all the time. And so I think for our group, we have people with different opinions. I actually was encouraging someone the other day. They asked me about posting something, and I was like, I didn't know if I even thought I agree with it, but I was like, I don't know if I even have this right. So like, I want you to have your expression. And so I think if we don't have to encourage, we don't enforce anything, but just be like, yay, someone has a different opinion in here, right? Would be good. Or maybe we don't keep looking at all the same sources of information or something. We seem to like the same podcast. Like we all listen to Benjamin. It's like,
I hear people now with different opinions who go through the process of outlining, steel manning each other's positions, then going at it and doing that and having that dialogue. I actually find myself getting really emotional now. It feels like something that's so missing. It feels so missing that I do actually find myself kind of getting quite sort of, I don't know what I describe the emotion as, but it's just a real sense of appreciation and longing that we have more of that. I don't know if anyone else gets that reaction, but it just feels like that's such an important thing to have that I always get a bit choked up when I hear it or see it done in a really productive way. There are organisations that do, yeah, it's worth saying, but
Yeah.
we don't always feel that we have it in our own sort of personal spheres sometimes.
I was invited to give a talk in California with Jennifer Law and Chloe Cole and Amy Souza, I guess, about the transition topic or the transgender topic. And I didn't know what I was going to say. And then, but what I was trying to think about, how do I approach a group of strangers to kind of map out what I've done? So I've done a lot of, I guess, research, probably 200 or 300 interviews around the topic of gender, from detransitioners to transitioners to radical feminist researchers, psychologists, sexologists, et cetera, all that stuff. And like, how do I formulate what's going on or what my position is in that discourse? And I was thinking in terms of left wing and right wing, and how the right wing might, generally speaking, right wing might be, they're critiquing the lack of tradition in a way and trying to figure out how to revitalize tradition, or how to like reapproach tradition, how to gain that which has been lost that might be, from their point of view, leading us to a very chaotic state. The more left wing, but actually not really left wing, more liberal point of view might be critiquing like the loss of certain values in our institutions and trying to think in terms of systems, thinking in terms of how did the experts go wrong? Where were the values? How do we regain rationality? The First Amendment, like all those liberal values, those things are lost. And I was thinking in terms of the gender debate, where we have traditional gender norms that have been upset and uprooted and led to a sort of free fall. And how do we go back? How do we understand the archetypes of male and female, the stereotypes of male and female? How do we distinguish like the differences between these things and still approach that with nuance? And then with regard to the liberal point of view, how do we allow for freedom of individuality without necessarily reinventing gender and then medicalizing it, because our experts have been caught up by this kind of post-liberal project of progressivism of allowing every given individual to manifest their own so-called gender identity and inscribe that into their bodies. And I was trying to find like the radical center between those two things. Like what do we really need to gain, or what's really been lost? And when I was thinking about Chloe Cole, who's a detransitioner, she's very young, she's only 23. And she was transitioned at 12, 13, had a double mastectomy at 15 in California, just sped along through this track before she had any development at all. And just thinking about her cohort, this Gen Z or millennial, or I guess it's Gen Z, and how they've lost intuition. We've denied them certain sort of archetypal understanding, certain sort of historical knowledge, and we've kind of thrust them into this just cycle of progressivism, of pushing the boundaries of individual manifestation. But what it seems like they haven't developed a lot of is a personal intuition, and something about the present modern world, and it might have to do with technology, it might have to do with the loss of tradition. So like, how do we regain intuition? So I was just thinking about that. I was wondering if that was something you guys want to speak to.
There's something about the whole trans project that is so profoundly disorienting to me. Like it's, to me, it's sort of almost like the ultimate form of being removed from oneself. it feels like adopting a very synthetic identity. And I don't mean that as an attack on anyone who's going down that route, because, I ultimately think everybody's trying to do their best and make their way through the world in a way that makes sense to them. Um, it's what's very troubling about it to me is the intensity of which it's being um, forced upon people as this is the way, and this is the way you must think about this, and you must believe that somebody can change their gender, and um, it's like we're being sort of prescribed a set of beliefs that are quite unusual beliefs until, just a few moments ago, and told that if you don't believe these things, um, then you are a horrible person and you're a transphobe and you're a bigot, and that you have to sort of carry these things through in all aspects of your life. You need to fly the flag, you need to use people's pronouns, everybody has to think about it exactly the same way. And I it's just a very, very peculiar phenomenon to me, because I don't know why does everybody have to think about it the same way. There have been trans people for a while, not at the level of today, and people there wasn't a huge societal thing about it. People were just kind of living their lives, and I wonder how we've gotten to the point where on an individual basis, we can't just kind of live our lives and find our people that support us. Some people will and some people won't, and that's okay. That's life, and leave it at that. It's the sort of militarization of it all that has really left me feeling very confused and kind of cut off from other people.
You know what I find really, it's peculiar, but it's also, I guess it goes with, talk about the intuition. I'm really thinking about that, Benjamin, and somehow people don't feel so embodied. So they're just not really, they're online, they're out somewhere else. And there's just all these external references too, like which test can I take that I know which score I get on the gingerbread man or something like that, right? And so there's this high degree of subjectivity. There's this high degree of me and my experience, but they're not really having I don't think they're really having their experience. I don't like, it's very me, but it's not going to one's essence. I think they think they're going to their essence, but I don't know, something else is coming in with other ideas. And to say, as I say that though, I wouldn't mind if the influences were things that I think are more, like you're talking about the archetypes, like things that seem to be proven down the ages that human beings resonate with, like that. That somehow as input doesn't seem as bad to me as going and having people tell you you're some made up gender word, and then you decide that you're going to wear that today. It's like it feels like people are going for outfits or something, and and I don't know. I have friends with small children. They've been very good with like having the girls be very much in their bodies and enjoy being girls. And they're actually kind of conservative Jewish. And it's like, they've really kept the tradition and the meals and the family. And there's like something, like, I feel those girls are really grounded in some sort of way. They have good sense of themselves. They have good sense of their boundaries. And, I think it's been just very careful parenting. There's definitely they have time, like they even do Shabbat. They have time where they're not running around trying to get stuff done. So I think and their parents do things like guided things, like spend some time to feel, whatever inside,
But those girls specifically are given a mold, like a mold that has been developed over centuries. Right. So they're given, like in a purely liberal rational subject in America is not supposed to have a mold. You're only given yourself and then a billion options. What you're saying is these girls are given some sort of tie to a tradition that roots them, and it feels like they have more agency. Is that what you're saying? Even though they're given, they're
very. I'm thinking of the older one, and I'm feeling protected. I didn't even say their names, but I noticed I'm like, should I be talking about them?
Okay.
They're just especially the older one. I mean, just self-possessed in a good way. Like what it's just in terms of even like saying, well, yes or no when it's appropriate, for oneself, and um, not being all like. I guess I see a lot of these younger kids. They seem so shaky inside, right? Like it seems like there isn't some developmental process that's happened where they're growing in not even needing rigid mental categories to organize and orient themselves at a certain point. That, as kids get older, they don't suddenly need to know, well, what's the latest thing I'm supposed to be adhering to? Because otherwise, if I don't, I'm a bad person, or I don't know what's going on. And I'd love to see, I just think any kids that are probably being raised like either homeschooled or there's an emphasis, I don't know if the Waldorf schools, I'm thinking about schools where the body, people are just more having the kids tune into their body. And because there's that line too between intuition and then, oh, I know what I want and I consume all the time. Right? It's like, what's intuition that's wisdom versus, oh, I know I want this and that. It's like a kid could go, I know I want candy. Well, I don't know. Right. So a little deeper than that level of knowing oneself, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're really talking about some wisdom and a way of being in the world that is anchored through time-tested traditions, which I think is a wonderful thing that we're losing. And I think you can be anchored to traditions, and perhaps maybe also still have some room for fluidity and creativity about how you live those traditions, so it doesn't have to be a rigid mold. But I do think people need some guiding principles to conduct their lives. Otherwise, it really is just a free-for-all, and one idea and one pursuit is as good as the other. And how do you, I think, Benjamin, when you're saying intuition, you kind of perhaps mean like tapping into a deeper sense of things. And I don't know how one can do that without any guiding principles. And in this sort of hyper stimulating world where there's endless options, you can even change your sex, supposedly. I think it's incredibly disorienting and confusing and sort of acts to detach us from ourselves.
Yeah, I was thinking as well, Benjamin, you asked a question, didn't you, about sort of whether or not being sort of tethered to something more traditional could give you somehow more freedom, even though the tendency for people in certain areas would be to kind of liberate themselves from anything that came before them. But these things that people are sort of tethering them to themselves to now is they feel almost kind of like superficial constructs, don't they? Sort of male, female, trans, furry. These things that don't feel these things don't feel particularly deep, and so to liberate oneself from the past and to sort of say we have endless fluidity is fine, as long as people are also able to understand how much deeper their their humanity can be. And I mean, how do we know about that stuff without understanding the wisdom of the past? That seems to be the sort of the problem at the moment, is that any sort of tethering to the past feels somehow oppressive or imposed, rather than something available for people as a sort of source of wisdom for people to take from.
David, go ahead.
Deborah.
I'm just thinking about, this isn't tied to tradition, but it ties to the body. David, I'm thinking about your work with your research on the interoception, and that, like, I'm wondering if there's anything here in terms of what you're finding out about people's relationship with their body, their interiority, and how this might tie to what we're talking about, if at all.
Interoception?
Yeah. Interoception, have you heard of proprioception? It's the sort of feeling of your body in space. So you have a kind of instinct that tells you where your joints are in space. It's kind of like it's an instinct that we have. And then interoception would be the feeling, the sensation of what your innards, your internal organs and things are doing. So heart rate, breathing, but also your skin and just, I guess what it can kind of, interoceptive research is looking at is the way in which we process our emotions, and then it has a lot to say about trauma as well. And just thinking about what you were saying, Deborah. I do know from our research at the moment that you have a psychological or physiological stressor that is uncomfortable, and if you don't process it, you don't make sense of it, you don't try and understand what it is that's happened to you, you don't learn from it. In fact, we've seen that people who have suffered sort of from having a stressor, like putting their hand in cold water and keeping it there for a certain amount of time. If you're not able to sit with the feeling afterwards, or you try and, in fact, they found that people who try to ignore and distract themselves from that feeling by distracting themselves by doing something else, those people are much more likely to then say, if they get sort of, I don't know, poked a couple of hours later with some sort of what would you call it? Non-noxious stimuli, just something that's more just a kind of mechanistic poke or something, that is much more likely to be rated as a painful experience. So there's a feeling in which unprocessed difficulties physiologically and emotionally as well, because they're all connected, can then contribute to feelings after the fact that they then get caused to be sort of also a difficulty too. I'm trying to tie this into what we're talking about.
Yeah, I didn't know if anything you were doing was tying to people's better sense of intuition or better sense of some kind of knowing, but it sounds like that's not what you're really getting at in the research.
No, it doesn't sort of come into identity in such a way. But I mean, the fact that these things are so disembodied is, and the fact that technology is disembodying us, and the fact that, I don't know, even the ideology is saying that the things that you reduce yourself down to are gender, skin color, and then that's it. There's no much. You don't go any further than that. It's firstly that for some reason they're the irreducible components, and then it's also that that's what makes you up, and therefore you understand yourself once you've got to that point. It just feels very disembodied.
David, since you want to be reasonable to a wide variety of people, what kind of language are you capable of using? Maybe you have a whole set of languages to talk about the deeper things. Like how do you broach topics that are deeper? Because anytime you go deeper, I think it seems like you would be specifying and maybe alienating people.
So, it's interesting. So we looked on the course at some material recently. In fact, we were encouraged to watch a film called Moonlight and then think about the film from an intersectional point of view afterwards, for example.
Ooh.
And
this movie is about a gay, black / trans queer individuals growing up. I never saw it, but I know that's kind of like what it's about.
Yeah, it's about how, I guess, well, I don't want to use the intersectionality terms, but there's a lot of, we were talking about it with regards to mentalizing, so how we're able to mentalize one another's experiences, and also the way in which poverty contributes, and early attachment relationships can distract from and contribute to people not necessarily understanding how to sit within themselves. Now, probably that's a simple point in a way, but I found the use of art and a film that encompasses so much and so much of a richness and texture with regards to human experience. Novels do the same thing. Film does the same thing. There's a sense in which these things are embodied, and that felt like a kind of putting the human and the art first, and then thinking about it from an intersectional point of view. I probably would have enjoyed not having to think about the intersectional point of view from the intersectional framework afterwards anyway. But for me, that felt deeper than cutting someone up into their intersectional components and then writing a film to kind of entertain or give credit to the intersectional framework we already have, and then make some sort of inferences about psychological human beings and the human race as a whole. Does that make sense?
And what was this course for? Was this a part of clinical psychology in some way?
Yeah. It was, and I just enjoyed the fact that we weren't necessarily using a textbook. We weren't using a textbook to think about someone in a disembodied way, thinking about black people in this way. We were thinking just about a person who happens to be all of these things, and then think about that from a psychological point of view. And that for me felt a lot more like we were thinking holistically. We were thinking, in an embodied sense. And we were trying to think about it from a mentalization point of view, but I realize I'm probably getting a bit
No.
psychological.
What's mentalization point of view? What's this?
Yeah, so it's people might have heard of theory of mind with regards to autism. So it's, I mean, I'm throwing another term in, but essentially mentalization, and I wonder if my teachers will be listening to me trying to do a definition right now. But essentially, mentalization is your ability to understand and empathize with another person and start to understand that they themselves, as a separate individual to you, have their own point of view, have their own psychological makeup, have their own reactions, and you get to start to understand maybe even the unconscious thoughts and feelings and behaviors they might be having, their sort of person, before they even do, by sitting in a room with them in a therapeutic sense, particularly, and getting to understand what they go through, maybe even a sort of subjective felt sense of mirroring their body, and being a part of that interaction gives you an opportunity to start stepping into their shoes and understanding them, and that's kind of the basic part of it. Deborah, you might be able to add a bit if you want to. Mentalization.
No, my brain was off somewhere else for the moment.
Where was it?
I know
Where did you go?
I was off thinking back to mentioning Chloe and then this intuition question. I was wondering, Benjamin, did you bring that up? Because was there a thought, how did she lose touch with her intuition to know that cutting things off would not be a good idea? Like, how could these people be getting so far removed from what, if we had intuition, we would know, no, don't do that. Is that where that question was coming from?
Well, I don't want to, well, I mean, from her story, I've heard it a few times.
Or maybe make it more general, but not her.
Well, I was just bringing it up as fodder for the conversation, and then try to use that to get further into what you guys were talking about thinking deeper about things. But for whatever reason, the cart came before the horse with Chloe and a lot of her cohort, where they start thinking in terms of sexuality before they have any sort of eroticism, like just natural desire, where they start thinking in terms of identity when their identity, the concept of identity isn't even salient at all. When they're starting to think in terms of gender in a world that doesn't really have gender roles as much, or they're so obfuscated that it doesn't even make sense to have a gender, because you're not on the path of becoming a matron. You're not on the path of becoming a wife. You're not on the path of becoming a husband. You're on the path of becoming anything. And so they're put in a position where she thinks that she is a boy because she enjoys the boys more. She wants to be a boy because she doesn't think she's pretty enough, and nobody in her life is saying, you don't think you're pretty enough because you want to be pretty, because there's some sort of value as a female that you have with regard to being pretty. And even that's off limits in certain gender critical points of view, that femininity and beauty would be necessarily important to a female on a biological level, on a psychological level, and being disrupted or interfered with that makes her think like, well, I must be a boy. And then, well, how do I become a boy? She goes to the doctors. The doctor's like, okay, well, this is how we're going to make you a boy. This is how we're going to relieve your stress or whatever, without really interrogating and allowing her room to become comfortable with her body parts, with her natural growth. She's put on a track to be completely disembodied from herself. And in her story specifically, there's this wonderful moment in my interview with her where, after she goes through all these processes of being modified, that this voice comes to her and tells her, stop lying to yourself. Stop lying to yourself. So it sounds like some sort of transcendent thing. Stop lying. And then she had to recognize all these different things. And it was something internal. Something spoke to her directly, it sounds like, from me. And nowhere in the world was that voice for her. And she wasn't given access to that voice. It had to intrude upon her at a certain point. I don't know if that answers the question.
What I am hearing with that is that these young people are entering into, being pulled into, I don't know what, like these intellectual like it's all in your mind. There's no reality, there's no lived experience, right, informing any of these things, and it's all conceptual. And like they're making these major life decisions based on something where they do not have the body, emotional, whatever, like in
It's a,
place to even be
it's a
entertaining. It's
synthetic.
all their head.
It's a mentalization, but it's a synthetic mentalization. It's a theory of mind without a theory of soul, almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think soul and mind, and again, that's another problematic word, and I want to bring that up to David. How do you talk about the soul? How do you talk about these deeper things like humanity without intruding upon some sort of non-rational, non-translatable terms? You did give me a hint though when you said thinking in terms of psychology. It felt more holistic. You used that term holistic to describe something that edges on a deeper level.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we were talking about spirituality more in our course, to be honest. I really do. We sort of talk about it as, we had a moment where we just thought about religion as another way to sort of talk about power and how which religions are which religions are more sort of what's the word? Pushed to the
Progressive.
margins rather than others. It's sort of like, okay, so we're just back to like a popularity power competition again, rather than thinking about the deeper things that go beneath. Sorry to use deeper again, but I really wish we were talking about it a lot more. There's so much there to be sort of plugged into for a psychology course. And luckily, I'm seeing a Jungian psychoanalyst for my own personal therapy, and he's happy to go as deep as you like with thinking about myth and dreams and what they could be. And there's a sense in which, I don't know, I feel a little, untethered sometimes, but at the same time, I feel completely. I get a sense of, what's the word? Is it being humbled? Being humbled in the sense that I'm just a component part of cultural evolution, and that there are myths that are so, been going on for so long, and I'm just this sort of little part of that in 2023, plugging into sort of human myths, and keeps you grounded at least.
You're so lucky to have a therapist who's able and willing to go there and hold that space. And I think therapy is sort of, as it becomes politicized, is losing the ability to hold that space. And sadly, so are the churches. I mean, I don't know what vessels we're going to have. I'm not saying there can't be other ones, but I don't know what vessels we're going to have for sort of transcendence and something that is deeper. If the churches are all sort of championing this, and
What, inclusion, diversity, like the intersectional framework? Is that what you're?
All of that, yes, and as well as the the sort of pride LGBTQ plus thing. There's churches now that are having drag queens come in and do little chats for children. And I passed a church the other day that had a pride flag and said, "Be proud of who you are. God is." It's sort of like all of the sort of mainline churches, all the major denominations are all picking up the pride flag and becoming sort of like institutions of critical social justice versus focusing on the traditions and helping people to learn from those and to give shape to people's lives. And so I wonder where when people are looking for something deeper and more transcendent than our temporary fleeting identities in this world, where are people going to be turning? I'm not sure.
Probably mostly the Orthodox, whatever, if that's even a holdout. You think about the Greek Orthodox, or more Orthodox Judaism, or Islam, or something like that, where people are more Orthodox.
Well, which would change our culture and change the West drastically if everybody's embracing Islam instead of Christianity. You're really talking about a major cultural shift. So that's another interesting element to this, I think.
What do you guys do when spirituality crops up in your practices? Deborah, are you also a counselor of some sort?
I'm I play one on TV. No, I don't even know the old Marcus Welby reference. I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. I act as though I'm a therapist. I'm actually not, but I've considered it, and then in my own like personal healing stuff, I've taken so many courses that one can take without actually like being in a training program. So like I know some stuff. But I'm not actually a therapist. I won't get into what I do, but I spent a lot of time on these topics, and I've done a lot of my own being a client, and I also considered getting a master's in divinity. I have a thing for like, how do we shepherd people, or midwife people is probably a better word, through things they're going through, and get them. I'm very interested in getting people plugged into the resources that would suit them, regardless of their tradition or orientation. But I don't do this formally. I mean, this is I do it for fun.
Well, and Jen and David, like when spirituality becomes inevitable, how does one talk about it properly? I guess that's a really big question, and it depends on the person you're in front of. Just wonder, like, is it a direction? Is it?
I mean,
That's a good
what
question.
comes up? I mean, yeah. Sorry, Jen, you're going to go.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just thinking, if you work with people who've been traumatized, sort of severely at some point in their life, then they will almost have experienced a sort of a spiritual trauma as well, because what's happened to them is so incomprehensible that sometimes they don't have an ability to understand whether or not, a sort of an unprocessed trauma almost is in some sort of good and evil place. There's a moral, there's almost a moral framework there that's been created in the absence of something. I don't know. It's almost as if someone's psyche will go there when they can't process things, or when they need to find a reason why something like that could have happened to them. So I think
Like God and the devil kind of thing, spirits. They think in terms of forces of good, forces of evil, angels, demons, stuff like that.
Exactly, and that's what you see it's also what you see with people who have psychosis. I worked in an early intervention psychosis team, and it was interesting just how much myth and spirituality came up in the hallucinations, came up in the experiences, came up in their understanding of who they were in what role in the world, and their own sense of themselves, and then what role they were put on this earth for sometimes. So spirituality probably comes up from the patients, even if it doesn't come from the universities. So we just say to them, well, here's a power graph, and you're sitting somewhere here.
No, I think, if you're, especially in times of struggle, people are trying to make meaning of their struggle, and they're trying to understand. So very often in therapy, it does lend itself towards a spiritual exploration. And I think, you can act as a support in that person and their struggle. And because sometimes it's causing a trauma, or a difficulty can even cause a person to sort of reshape some of their beliefs and assumptions. It can change a person's spirituality a bit. Sometimes it can make it even deeper. They can tap into a place within themselves where they feel that they can better understand the suffering of others, and this ultimately guides them towards being a more compassionate person. All sorts of things can come out of struggle and an exploration of spirituality.
There's a question from chat. I don't really understand what Jay is talking about, so maybe you guys could help me clarify this. But Jay is wondering how existential counseling programs are being impacted by social justice. Has social justice found its way into the existential part of the counseling field? I don't know what he means by existential counseling programs. You guys sit around and read Sartre and drink a lot of coffee and opine about hell and other people. So.
on, but that was not what my program was like. So I don't actually know the answer to that question.
I want to sign up though.
I know.
I think
Okay.
I don't know if I know what it is, but I think it might be sort of, given that we're going to die,
Okay.
bad things are going to happen, whatever. How does one manage psychologically and kind of have a good life? I don't really know, though. Don't quote me on that, but I have a feeling there's a bit of things are hard and dark, kind of, and so therefore, how does one proceed in that? But that might not be true.
Okay, well, that's a good question. In the context of death, or bringing up the context of death, that causes one to think about time and themselves differently. That's a really big intrusion onto the person. And I don't know how to think about death. I don't know how to talk about death. Everybody has to kind of think of it in their own terms. But psychologically speaking, or within the context of the counseling process, what is death, or how does one approach death? What is the purpose or the meaning, I guess, of just that framework? That sounds like a very existential kind of framework. And then how do you think in terms of social justice with regard to death? How do you think in terms of your own legacy, your own life, the meaning of your actions? And if, I guess, social justice could be one way of making yourself be meaningful in terms of death or history, something like that. If you guys have any input or training in that.
I have not. I don't have any experience in how social justice links to existential psychology, which is really about how we make meaning of the major things. Like, how do we make meaning of our life? How do we make meaning of death? And and I haven't had people talk about death or any major issues in the light through a social justice lens. I have not had that experience. And I rather doubt that I will, because I don't think that all this critical social justice stuff really maps on to the most central, really jaw-dropping aspects of human experience. When you lose someone you love, or you find out you have a cancer diagnosis, it's real. It's real. And when people are being real, they tend to not be theoretical. And so you don't see many people that are really in the depths of intense suffering starting to go into political theory. And I hope that we don't, because I think that will be yet another removal from ourselves and another disassociation. But I don't see it. And that's just another reason why I don't think that this stuff belongs in therapy, because therapy is very much about what's real. What are we really feeling? What are we really thinking? And it's not meant to be sort of surface or superimposing things on our experience to try to kind of reshape them.
Although I have to admit, I've been doing this like bi-weekly group that's around grief, and the facilitator just this last time put her pronouns in on her thing, and I'm like, oh no, is this coming into the grief space? She didn't say anything about it, but I was like, is this encroaching here?
The grief space. Could you expand on that, Deborah? What do you mean the grief space?
Well, I mean, it's a group that's people processing grief. And so somehow I just didn't want to be reminded of any of that while I was in a thing like that. And then I saw, oh, okay, now that this little vibe of a social justice thing, she didn't say anything about it, but now it's like on the screen. It's like on the Zoom. It's like I see it. It's like I'm sitting here. And so I started to notice a little bit of like separation in my like participating, because there's a little bit, well, something going to else happen here, or are we going to start having an ideology here? I mean, we didn't, but that gave me a little pause. Like, now are the other people going to put their pronoun, like, is there going to be more of it? So I guess that's what I meant.
Jen, you brought up something really insightful for me about disassociation and how spirituality, counseling, wellness, mindfulness, all these things that we can loosely define as spiritual or mental health space stuff, is about dealing with dissociation when it arises, how it arises, how past experiences, past lives, past lived experiences, it's probably like in between those two things, cause us to disassociate, and breaking down all these different things that cause us to disassociate from reality, and maybe truth and goodness and beauty are part of reality. But anything that causes more distance or disassociation, I guess distance or difference between oneself and their self, is an intrusion on that space. It's the opposite of mental health. It necessarily has to be the opposite of mental health. You can't deal with the outside world. You can't deal with historical and sociological phenomena. Again, Peterson, ease until you're connected to your own room, until you've done the work to organize your connection to yourself. And so I guess that's one vector of criticism of critical social justice in certain spheres, insofar as it's taking over the sphere of counseling and diverting it from the process of somebody understanding themselves and then understanding the world, and then understanding how to be a compassionate person in the world. First, you have to love yourself, then you love your family, then you love your neighbors, then you can start thinking about loving history, right? I would suppose.
Yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, that is the thing that I like about some of Jordan Peterson's thoughts, is that he really does believe in the individual, and that's sort of the starting point. You know, you start by getting your own life in order before you arrogantly go out and try to change the entire world. And so ultimately, a person who has their life in order and is paying attention to those details within their own self and within their own life, who doesn't think that they're somehow morally or intellectually superior to those details, but manages their life, manages their personal relationships, that person can then bring more into the world.
It reminds me of
I would absolutely agree with that. Not that you have to be perfect to make a difference in the world, because then you'll be waiting forever. But yeah, in general, I agree with that way of looking at things. What were you going to say, Deborah?
Yeah, I think I've said this in this group before, but it kind of ties in. I like it. I can't remember the guy's name. He was at like a CEO of an insurance company of all things, but he said something to the effect of the quality of an intervention, like in a system, depends on the state of consciousness of the intervener. So, I mean, it's this kind of thing, like if you're really fragmented or not very well integrated or just whatever, like whatever you do out there is just going to not have, good reverberations. But if you're coming from like a pretty high state of consciousness or something like that, it's more likely what you're doing will have a positive impact.
She's got those good reverberations. She's done all her psychopotations.
Benjamin,
So, David,
I like how your mind works.
David, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, when you were saying, like, you were talking, somebody pegged you as an individualist and you weren't collectivist enough. Do you think that like there's a counter there? Like if you were put in that situation again and it wasn't going to destroy your reputation or in the social moment, how you would challenge somebody saying you're an individualist, not a collectivist, or putting some sort of moral weight on you or pegging you in that way? Is there a way that you could judo that?
I thought about it afterwards, and I thought that, well, obviously, one, just because I'm criticizing a collectivist viewpoint doesn't make me an individualist, as we've already sort of said. But I guess the project of a secular society is to give people the opportunity to find their own collective, to find their own community, to reach out to those places, to not necessarily be designated to those places in a fixed way from birth, or because they like to have sex with people who look a certain way. I don't know. There's so much freedom there to find those communities, and I would probably just say I've got plenty of other parts to me that feel belonging in other communities, and I guess I plug into collectivist ideas. And I don't know. Would that be a good way of judoing it? I'm not sure that would be a judo chop. That'd be a sort of slowly sort of sending someone to judo sleep, maybe. But
Well,
um,
you can bring up your pronouns. Say, well, I use I, so, and you use he for me. So I'm not a pluralist. I begin as an individual. So every
Royal
move I
we.
make has to begin with that. I'm not the royal we. Right.
yeah, I mean, I guess I was just thinking of these existential questions as well, and thinking that, gosh, social justice existentialism is all about, if you don't use the right pronouns, then you've erased my identity. I've literally not. I don't exist anymore because of that. That's, and that again just go back to the idea that you can't they're irreducible components, aren't they? Sex, gender, and those things. And there's no layer underneath it. So once you've not acknowledged that part, you've erased my identity somehow. Also, I'd like to just say, what's wrong with being someone who values the individual? I mean, yeah, that's the other irritating thing is we have, and I think Carol Show has done done a good bit of research on this, like understanding some of the ways in which clinical psychology programs seem to have some ideas kind of built into them at the moment. There's an acronym called WEIRD, Western Educated Industrialized. I can't remember the R or the D actually. Rich, and another one. But there's a sense in which just on the course itself, individuality and individualism has had its day. We've done psychoanalysis. We've done that form of psychology. That stuff's old hat. It's all about systemic points of view. It's all about the collectivist points of view. So I guess the other thing would be to just say to people, can you go back more than 20 years in history and think about when we've had some pretty awful things that have happened as a result of well-meaning individuals possibly going along with collectivist ideas. I just don't think that people feel the after effects of that anymore, because it's in too much of the past, even though it's only 50, 60 years ago. Yeah.
Be yourself, just like everybody else. It's that constant. It's hyper individualism and hyper collectivism. It's this horseshoe theory with the if you truly adopt honestly the social justice points of view. And I was just thinking like that whole like you're erasing their existence. It's a power play. I don't think anybody actually believes that anybody's existence is being erased. It's a power play. Say you're invalid. I'm sure some people do, but I think it's usually used in third person, like a kind of a surrogate offense. Like you're erasing their existence. It's kind of political speak, but I guess it bleeds into individual conceptions of themselves and the other, too. So I don't think it's healthy at all. But I don't know to what extent people actually use that outside of the rubric of gaining power and shoring up power for a certain point of view.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are people getting starved for lack of depth? I mean, I'm just wondering, even with your classmates, David, like, is that going to hit? Will it just hit people at some point? I don't know. I don't know how long people can go on with a lot of surface entertainment and being on Twitter and just keeping a shallow sort of way of operating. But I just wonder, at some point, is it possible that some sort of hunger will eventually overtake them? Or can we keep having people at the shallow end of the pool?
It's a good question. I mean, I've seen it on the course. I've been encouraged, I think, since the a year and a half ago when the course started, just how many people are starting to hunger for conversations. You have to have them sometimes in the corridor, or you have to have them one-to-one, or down the pub later on, or something like that. But yeah, so the hunger's there. But I know what you mean. I just think that it feels like it's getting quieter. It's almost as if, and I feel this as well, is, you see certain things that are presented and you think, if I can't sort of freely think and speak on this topic, because at some point I might make a little move in the wrong place, I might not speak at all. And sometimes it's like an awareness of more of a hunger and awareness can actually probably make you feel even quieter, because you then sort of start, if I'm actually moving, I'm now moving into a different field of what I think about this, and therefore I'm more at risk of exposing myself. Perhaps that's what I wonder actually.
Well, Leslie's good at keeping time. We've been on for an hour. Thank you very much. I think a couple of people are asking who you all are, and I guess, but you guys do this every week, so I don't feel introductions were necessary. So I apologize for that if I didn't do that properly. But why don't we plug again where people can find the resources that you guys are developing? solidgroundsupport.com, correct? And for $5 a month, you guys can join these groups, peer counseling groups, peer support groups, right? That are non-legal and non-psychological. You guys do not dispense with meds, unfortunately, but I guess legally that's probably the best way to go about it. Anything coming up for you guys on the horizon this summer? You're planning individually or as a collective?
We need a group trip. No.
Yeah.
Why not?
That would be wonderful. Yeah, somebody has suggested we do retreats. We might do some group retreats at some point. We'll see. Yeah, but solidgroundsupport.com. And we're happy to have you join our groups. There's 4 different groups running. So if you pay $5 a month, you can go to any one of those groups.
And all of them.
Yeah, you can go to all of them.
Oh, wow.
You can, yeah, absolutely. We won't get sick of seeing you.
Okay. Swingers Club for people who like to talk. And I'm sure that you guys are going to talk about monogamy coming up here later on. Leslie, again, Leslie's out, and Leslie's traveling abroad, and she'll be back next week. Thank you guys very much for joining. Thanks, chat, and thanks for letting me host you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
very
really
much.
appreciate it, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, man.